we should be. Okay. All right. Okay, we're looking good here. We have quite a few people in the room. I'm going to get started with my opening statements and then people can join as they wish. So, Carol, would you mind just making sure to admit others that are joining?
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay. So let's see.
And a good girl.
All right, everyone. If everyone could, who is not speaking, just mute their computers, that will be great. So my name is Tasha Nesbitt, and I'm the president of Women in Film San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome to the event. We are a volunteer-run organization. We're a nonprofit, and we actively provide networking, educational, and social opportunities for over 1,000 women in film, TV, and digital media makers in San Francisco Bay Area. Our mission is to empower, promote, and celebrate women's creative work. We do this by providing useful solutions, building a strong community to further the craft of women working in all levels of film, television, and digital media. Through our work, we host events, virtual and in-person mixers. Well, not in person yet, but we will again. Panels, workshops, and screenings, and talks like this one. We nurture a thriving online community through our newsletters, our blog, and our social media. And we do cherish the diversity and invite humans of any gender, age, ethnicity, national origin, range of abilities, sexual orientation, gender identity, financial means and education, and political perspective to join Women in Film San Francisco Bay Area as an active member and or board member. Most of all, we invite you to be fully present with us tonight during this special, engaging evening. Now, I want to introduce Julie Rubio, a member of the board, to say a few words. Thanks so much. Julie.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you all here this evening. Welcome. My name is Julie Rubio, and thank you, Tasha. I'm proud to serve on the board as the business director of Women in Film San Francisco Bay Area. And tonight, I'm really honored to introduce you to a very special guest speaker, attorney Mr. Jack Lerner. He is a clinical professor of law and the director of the Intellectual Property Arts and Tech Clinic at UC Irvine School of Law. And tonight, he will discuss the doctrine of fair use in copyright, which allows filmmakers to introduce copyrighted material into their films without permission or payment for purpose, such as criticism or commentary, and in other situations. In 2016, Professor Lerner received the California Lawyer Attorney of the Year Award for his work helping filmmakers and authors. The Clay Award recognized his and his team's work achieving exceptional work and to the copyright laws for filmmakers and authors that preserve the rights to fair use and freedom of expression in the digital age. Speaking from my personal experience of Jack and his team at UCI, he's taken on our film, Tamara, that I'm directing and producing alongside my fellow producer and board members, Amy Harrison and Tasha Nesbitt. And also dear friend of his, Neva Tassin. They have offered us such incredible education, and their guidance on fair use has allowed us to make a better and legal film. Their dedication to our film has been invaluable. We are sincerely grateful for all of their time and energy that they have given to our project, and I highly recommend UCI Intellectual Property Arts and Tech Clinic. And Jack will be answering some of your questions tonight after the presentation. But first, please let us give a warm welcome to our very special guest, Mr. Jack Lerner.
Hi, everyone on mute out there in Zoom land. It's really too bad that we're not here together. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Great. Well, it's a huge pleasure to be here. I lived in the Bay Area, lived in San Francisco for 8 years from 2001 to 2009. And I never thought I would leave. I ended up in LA and then Irvine, but I'll always have a special place in my heart for San Francisco and the Bay and the East Bay. So it's a huge pleasure to return to the Bay Area, and hopefully we can do this again next year in person. I have a bunch of slides, so I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll see if this works. I'm going to do it in kind of the way they have. It's been in beta for like 2 years, but whatever. Let me see here. I hadn't planned on sharing my screen quite in this way until just now, but let's see here. Just a moment. Here we go. Now you should be able to see me. Hi. So anyway, okay, this is good. Yeah, so it's a huge pleasure to be here. It's been great to get to know Julie and see her project, and learn a little bit about Tamara de Lampica. I am a professor at UCI. I run the UCI Intellectual Property Arts and Technology Clinic. This is our website you see on the right, and this is a picture of the beautiful UCI School of Law on the left. And we work with artists, journalists, filmmakers, scholars, technologists, startups, at the intersection of technology, law, and the public interest. We do a ton of work. One of our sort of bread and butter types of things is working with documentary filmmakers, and sometimes independent filmmakers on fair use issues. And we just published a study on fair use in February. We're now updating that, so you can get that on our website as well. And if you go to the up here where it says, can you all see my mouse moving around? No. Well, if you go to the top of the website and click on practice areas, you can actually see a link about our filmmaker services. And there's and if you click on inquire, we have an intake form as well. But of course, everyone is also welcome to email me after this, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I want to start by just lifting up some of the women in this field that have been incredible mentors, colleagues, friends, and collaborators. Susan Seeger is my colleague in the UCI Intellectual Property Arts and Technology Clinic. She's also a lawyer at Davis Wright Tremaine. So she's wonderful. And she heads our press freedom and transparency practice. And so they are doing things like suing the LA Sheriff's Department for information about their all their police discipline, and they're about to shake loose hundreds and hundreds of confidential settlements with police. But she's also a fair use guru. She's wonderful. The folks at Donaldson Califf Perez in Beverly Hills, but they work with a lot of Bay Area people. Lisa Califf is one of the named partners, but Dale Nelson and Katie Ali Mohammadi are also really wonderful, incredible lawyers. And I'm a scholar in residence for 2021 at Donaldson Califf Perez. And I've gotten to know them well. They're wonderful lawyers. Diana Palacios is also terrific and does this kind of work at Davis Wright Tremaine in LA. And finally, some of you probably know Justine Jacob, who is just one of the best lawyers working in this field. I mean, all of the people I've mentioned are absolute superstars, but Justine is really great. She does a lot of fair use counseling, but also a lot of production legal, and she's terrific. So I don't think she's here. I doubt if she was here, she'd be the one speaking probably, but she's wonderful. And we call each other and ask each other questions all the time. So I just want to lift up some of the incredible women in this space. It means a lot to me to be able to talk to women filmmakers. Well over the majority of our clients are women, usually with very little to no funding, often first-time filmmakers or very junior in their career. And they're often talking about issues that are important to women. We worked on Kusama Infinity for many years, if people saw that film. We've worked on, of course, we're working with Julie, and a lot of films involving not just women and women's issues, but marginalized communities, and questions around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So those are the kinds of things that we take on, as well as films that are that are probably going to get produced and get out there as well. So before I get into the legal stuff, a couple of things. First of all, I'm not going to be able to answer anyone's specific questions. So if you have a question about your situation, I can answer with general principles that might be applicable to your case. But if I either have to send you a bill or an engagement letter before I give you any actual advice. So just as a heads up. The other thing is question for Tasha and Julie. How do we do questions? Are people going to put them in the chat or DM you, or
how would you like to do them, Jack? Would you?
Well, I think it's probably best to hold questions for the end. I'll probably talk for another 45 minutes, and then we'll have, or maybe a little bit more than that. But we have till 9, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, 2 hours on Zoom is a lot for anybody, whether you're speaking or listening. So we don't have to go that late, but I'm happy to stay. But I'm probably going to try to wrap up with a presentation between 8 and 8:15, so that we have plenty of time to answer people's questions.
Wonderful. We'll wait on questions.
Yeah.
Then.
So yeah, just DM your questions to Tasha or Julie then. Does that sound good? Or you can stick them. You can also just drop them in the chat, but I'm not going to be able to read the chat until the end, or else I'll be interrupting myself all the time.
I'll take notes of them.
So Julie gave the correct definition of fair use, and I'm so proud of my students and of her that she got that right, because a lot of people don't quite understand what fair use is, but it's really a right to use someone's work without permission or payment when done for things like criticism or commentary, or when you're repurposing the work, more generally, when you're repurposing the work in a way that adds new meaning or expression. And we'll talk about that. But a key thing to understand is it's, you bring fair use up generally after, as a defense, after you've been, someone has brought a lawsuit against you. But it's not a legal defense as much as it is a right, because fair use is a doctrine that is grounded in the First Amendment, and it's the doctrine that allows copyright to coexist with the First Amendment. And that's why, just the same way I feel strongly about cultural expression, artistic expression, and freedom of expression more generally, I also feel very strongly that you can't talk about culture without showing people what you're talking about. And you can't express yourself if copyright can become a form of private censorship. And so the Supreme Court has said this numerous times, more recently in Google versus Oracle, that fair use is essentially the First Amendment safeguard or First Amendment safety valve that allows copyright to coexist with the First Amendment. The doctrine dates all the way back to 1841, when somebody tried to publish, and I actually have a copy of it right here, tried to publish The Life of George Washington, an abridged version of a multi-volume book. It's like a 20-volume book called The Writings of Washington. And so somebody said, let's take the greatest hits of Washington and put them into a book. And Justice Story in 1841 said, you know what? In some cases that might be okay. Here, all you did was just take an abridged version of something else and publish it, and that's not okay. But let's analyze this going forward using these 4 factors. And the 4 factors that Justice Story articulated all the way back then are still good law that we use every day to this day, and are in courts this day. Now, by 1976, Congress said fair use is here to stay. At that point, it was already 150 years old. Fair use is here to stay. so let's codify it. Let's actually write it into the law as opposed to just being judge-made law. And so they took the factors that Justice Story articulated and put them right into the Copyright Act, Title 17 of our statutes. So what are the 4 factors? The first one is, okay, well, how are you using the work, right? Are you using it for criticism or commentary, or just for entertainment purposes? If it's for criticism and commentary, which is the main one that documentary filmmakers use, that's more likely to be okay. Is the work that you were using, the upstream work or the original work, was it published or unpublished? Are we talking about baseball scores or a description of, of a news story, or are we talking about, a poem or a painting or a novel? And it's going to be more likely to be fair use if it's a highly factual work with just a thin copyright. How much did you use, right? Did you use, let's say you used, 2 minutes of a song, of a 3-minute song, that's not good, right? If you used 10 seconds of a song, just enough to make your point, that's better. The other thing is, did you take all the best parts of the novel and republish those? And so even though you only published 10 pages of a 300-page novel, it tells you all the spoilers, everything there is, that wouldn't be good, right? So how much did you use? Did you use the heart of the work? Did you use a lot of the work? Now, I want to get one thing that is really important. There is no such thing as a flat rule. Oh, you can use, if you use up to 3 seconds, it's fine. If you use up to 30 seconds of an excerpt, it's fine, whatever. There is, sometimes it's okay to use the entire work, like a photograph, for example, from top to bottom, start to finish. More often, it depends on the context, and we'll get into that. But the rule of thumb, and I'll probably repeat this several times, you want to use only as much as is necessary to make your point and to get your point across, and not more, right? So it's tempting, and it's a common artistic technique to have something that's layered throughout the film. You might repeat to it as a touch point, or harken back to it as a touch point. Probably not okay, and all those things. So if you're using it, and it's a common artistic technique to do that, but that's often not going to be possible with fair use, right? So, again, like maybe I want to use actually several seconds before that, so that the clip starts while I'm still in the previous scene, and it's going to kind of bleed into to the scene where you're making the fair use, and then it's going to keep going and bleed into the next scene. Common editing technique, common filmmaking technique, perfectly appropriate artistically, aesthetically, but in some cases not appropriate under fair use. And so another rule, while we're talking about it, of thumb, that people that are sort of a truism about fair use is, when we look at a film, we look at every clip individually, and then we compare that to the overall film. And so, and that's the way a court's going to do it as well. They're going to take it on a case-by-case basis. Fortunately, we know enough from hundreds and hundreds of fair use cases that have come down over the past 2-3 decades, but of course, going back to 1841, we do have enough predictability. So much so that you can make fair use reliably, safely, and appropriately, and get it insured, and and get your product to market. And that's actually done quite routinely these days. And so fair use is a case-by-case doctrine, but I don't think you can say, well, it's no more than the right to hire a lawyer and defend yourself in court. It's actually much more reliable and much easier to do once you've talked with a lawyer about it, and then you can get someone to look at your film, write an opinion letter, and make fair use. And often that is way more affordable than getting clearance for everything. It's also sometimes faster. And sometimes people might say, no, I don't like what you're going to say about my film, so I'm just not going to let you do it. And that's why fair use exists. Otherwise, it will become a form of a private censorship. Now, the fourth factor is really important as well. That's the effect of the use upon the potential market for the copyrighted work. So what does this mean? There was a case about 15, 20 years ago involving, it's actually almost the exact same facts as the George Washington collected writings case from 1841. A company came along and said, we're going to show all the coolest parts of all the Elvis movies. And they marketed this compilation saying, you'll never have to watch another Elvis movie again. Guess what? The court said that's not fair use. Guess what? The court was right. It's not fair use. The issue there was, this was replacing the market for the work. This was not saying, this is a different use, like let's say a movie review. A movie review does not supplant or replace the market for the work, and that's what the courts look at. Now, what about the licensing market? Like if I want to use one of my favorite examples is, at the end of The Godfather, they kiss Michael's ring, and in real life, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen The Godfather, they kiss the new Godfather's ring at the end of the first film. And apparently that wasn't actually ever done in real life, but then mafiosos started doing that in real life. And so if I were going to make a film about, the history of organized crime in the United States, I might want to show that scene. Fair use would allow me to show that scene. That would be fine. Now, maybe you would say, well, hold on a minute. Paramount might want to, they get licenses for that all the time. You're supplanting their market for their licensing. And Paramount would be wrong if they were to say that. Now, all the big studios know enough about fair use. They know not to sue unless it's a really egregious fair use and it's done inappropriately. But if you do a fair use of a big studio work appropriately, you'll almost never run into trouble. It's with other groups like photographers where you might run into much more trouble. Also music and photography are very litigious. But anyway, so Paramount would say, you're supplanting my licensing market for this. You're supposed to get a license. That's not how the market factor works with fair use. The way that factor works is the Supreme Court has said, well, you don't have right to transformative uses of your work. So let's talk about that concept. Here's how Congress enacted these in section 107 of the Copyright Act. But it's basically exactly like what we were talking about before: purpose, nature, amount, and market. Transformative use. So 1994, the Supreme Court came down with this case called Campbell versus Acuff Rose. Excuse me. So we had the Roy Orbison song, Pretty Woman. Two Live Crew made an album called As Nasty as They Want to Be, because they'd already gotten in a lot of trouble for the content of their lyrics. They made an album called As Nasty as They Want to Be, and then they made another one called As Clean as They Want to Be. And in this one, they had a song that was so not safe for work, shall I say, that it didn't even make it onto the clean version. So instead, they recorded a cover of Oh Pretty Woman called Hairy Woman, and it was saying things like Hairy Woman. So I'm speaking to women in film of the San Francisco Bay Area, and so I don't have to point out how misogynistic the whole concept is, but that misogynistic concept in this case led to law that has allowed a lot of, I think, really important speech in filmmaking and in a lot of other milieu. Because what happened was the court said, okay, transformative use. And again, the court's going back to Justice Story, Folsom versus March, 1841. And the court saying, okay, well, does the new work just replace the object of the original creation, or does it add something new? Does it add further meaning or a new expression, meaning, or message? Does it, is there a new purpose or a different character? If so, then it's called transformative use. And that will be a really important factor for the court. In most cases, and recently it's trending a little bit in the other direction, but for 25 years after the Campbell versus Acuff Rose case, essentially, if transformative use would often outweigh the other factors, right? And so the more transformative is, the less will be the significance of other factors. And again, the court is talking about giving breathing space within the confines of copyright. In other words, it's a safety valve or a safeguard that prevents copyright from becoming a form of private censorship. So this was 1994. But what we saw beginning in the late 80s and then really taking off in the 90s and early 2000s was a clearance culture developing where, AMC or HBO or PBS would say, if your film goes on the air, everything needs to be cleared. You can make fair use, the law's on your side, but we don't care. No fair use. It's too risky for us. And at the same time, rights holders started going after people for every use, not just for traditional ones where it was clear it was not fair use. And this began to really hamper filmmakers. So a couple of scholars did a study in 2004 called Untold Stories. Pat Ofterheide, whose picture should have been up at the beginning, who's a giant in this field of fair use. She's a professor at American University and a former journalist and just a wonderful individual. So she and another scholar did this study that just collected stories about how people could make their films because of the clearance culture that developed. So they took that and then all these documentary filmmakers and the associations that represented them got together in a room and said, what do we think is fair, given that we're rights holders and we're also going to be sued? And they came up with 4 best practices. And then they had 2 lawyers in the room, Peter Yazzie, who was a professor at American University and still does a lot of fair use work to this day, and Peter Yazzie and Michael Donaldson. And they vetted the best practices and said, do these comport with the law? And they concluded that they do. So what are the 4 best practices that the filmmakers use? Okay, for social, political, or cultural critique, right? So a good example there is if I'm saying, actually a classic example that the folks at American University who published this guide, and by the way, you can Google this online, you can find it. It's a 12-page guide. It's written for laypersons. It's not for lawyers to read. I mean, it's not designed for people with legal training to read. Anyone can read this and begin to apply it. But the idea and one of the original examples they used was the film Killing Us Softly about misogyny in advertising, and how so much advertising was exploitative. And so the idea is, if I'm going to be saying, hey, look at this music video, look, I'm going to analyze this particular music video and show you why the violence in this video is problematic, or why the sexism in this video is problematic. That would be an example of the first category, social, political, cultural critique. Second category might be just simply to illustrate an argument. So maybe you say, look, I can point to lots of sexism in advertising, for example. Here's one example, right? Here's another example. That would be the second category. Incidental use is something that's common in filmmaking, but it's also really important. So my favorite example is, let's say I want to do a documentary about life in the dorms at UCI, and I go into the dorms and someone has a huge poster of Radiohead in their dorm. Do I need to blur that out? And the answer is absolutely not. Fair use says that I don't have to alter reality in order to show reality, to show what's actually happening. And so that's a good example of incidental use. Another one is that you're filming someone on the street and there's music playing out of the loudspeaker of the bodega. Another example of incidental use. And then one of the more complicated ones is use in a historical sequence. So the idea there is, imagine a film about the civil rights movement. And I say, I'm doing a film about early Bob Dylan, and I'm talking about how he came up in a time, in the civil rights movement was connected in so many ways to the folk movement in New York City. And all this activity was going on. And then I show a montage of a bunch of different civil rights type activity that was going on in this environment, in this particular historical milieu. And that would be appropriate, right? Now, if I just showed a bunch of stuff, I see Kelly White's question. I will come back to that question. In narrative films, it's a little bit different. In narrative films, it's a little bit narrower fair use argument, but people make fair use in narrative filmmaking all the time, including using copyrighted materials, but it's a little more complicated. So I'll come to that. Anyway, so that's an example of using something in historical sequence. And then again, my colleague, friend, and mentor Michael Donaldson has a rubric that he and folks at his firm use fairly regularly, and these actually track the 4 factors that Justice Story came up with way back when, right? The first one is, are you using something to, and I also say demonstrate, illustrate, or support a point that you're trying to make, right? Are you using only what's reasonably appropriate to illustrate or support the point being made? And finally, what I call the sleepy judge rule, right? How is it easy to see that connection? And sometimes we get filmmakers and we say, why are you showing this? Why are you playing this song? We don't understand why this song is in there if it's not cleared, because we don't see the fair use argument. And the client will come back and say, well, that's because, the subject of my film listened to the song every morning, and it's what got him up through the day. This song saved his life. And then we'd say, you know what, if you talk about that, and you talk about the song in context of that, then it's going to be fair use. And if you don't, then it could be problematic. So that is that's a good example of when being rigorous about answering these questions or going back to these factors can actually make your film, if you're a documentary filmmaker anyway, clearer, and sometimes makes the arguments actually more powerful and more straightforward, if that's what you're going for. So sometimes our clients do come back to us and say, wow, that actually made the film stronger, made the film better and clearer, because we had to make that point clear to the average viewer, and so on. Another way to think about fair use is, some things are really clear. We'll talk about some of these cases, and some are kind of more of a gray area. Here's one where Jeff Koons created a collage that was found to be fair use, but then there's some other ones where a news service used the footage of the Reginald Denny beating during the Rodney King riots that was held not to be fair use, and another one held it to be fair use. And then you have the Elvis example I was telling you before, clearly not fair use, right? Abridged version of a multi-volume set of letters, not fair use, not fair use. So one way to think of it, and so what we try to do is get everybody over on the left side here, on the right side rather, so they're way over here, and it's really safe. All right. I saw we had a question in the chat about narrative filmmaking. You can make fair use in narrative filmmaking. A great example is the Jersey Boys Broadway show used a clip from the Ed Sullivan Show. And the court said, the Ed Sullivan Show brought a suit and they lost in federal court. And the court said, you know what? The Jersey Boys is the story of the Four Seasons, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. When they went on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was a very big deal for them. It was a huge turning point in their career. And so they used a clip of the Ed Sullivan Show at the very end of the first act. So sort of say, now they've hit the big time, go to intermission. And the court said that's okay because they're using this as a biographical anchor, right? And so this is actually instrumental to telling a real story about something that really happened to them. And so this is an example of a use in a narrative project. It's still a historical biographical project, but it's a narrative project. And when the Jersey Boys movie came out, guess what? They put Ed Sullivan in there. And what you see on the right is a screenshot from the Ed Sullivan film. And so that's pretty, it's a pretty good case because really, like, how are you going to be able to tell the story of the Jersey Boys without showing that clip? In my view and in the court's view, it would really be compromised. And more importantly, ultimately free speech permits that. All right. Another good example is an unauthorized parody a sequel to the Gone with the Wind was published, and the courts said this was okay. And this was basically a retelling of Gone with the Wind from an enslaved person's point of view, instead of from the slaveholders, torturers, and executioners' point of view. Meanwhile, somebody said, you know what, I want to write a sequel to The Catcher in the Rye. And the answer, and so what happened there was the court said, this is a straight up sequel. A straight up sequel is not fair use. You have to be critical of the original work, or you have to be adding something new that is different from just a sequel. And so in the Catcher in the Rye case, it was not fair use. But in the Gone with the Wind case, it was fair use. And that's really because this film, The Wind Done Gone, was really a tremendous critique of Gone with the Wind. And by the way, Jubilee is an amazing book. If you haven't picked up Jubilee, it's written about 50 or 60 years ago, but that's another retelling of the story of the Civil War from an enslaved person's perspective. And it's really, really powerful book that surprisingly few people know about. So now I'm going to show a few quick clips. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment, if I can figure out how to do that. And I'm going to switch. To, let's see. So the film I was showing you was, I just closed my slides, darn it. The film I was showing you, give me a moment here, sorry. All right, so I'm going to show you a short clip here from a case from 2005. And what I'd like to do is folks can we're gonna have a little show of hands or the icon of hands if you don't want to turn your camera on as to whether you think it's fair use. So let me just share my screen again and pull this up. Okay, let's see here. Well, all the clips I had queued are giving me trouble now. Just give me a moment. Here we go. I know you can't see it, don't worry. All right.
Good old technology.
So annoying.
Right?
All right, here we go. All right, can you see a newscaster talking head? Yes. Okay, this is from Good Morning America.
Entertainment editor Joel Siegel is here with a
Can folks
closer
hear
look
it?
at Contact and how the movies have portrayed alien life over the years. Hi, Joel.
Here's where we come in, Joan. Jodie Foster is meeting with the Presidential Commission. We've already made contact with the civilization in the star system Vega, 27 light years away. We've been sent blueprints for a huge machine. The question is, do we build it? And the answers are everything Hollywood has taught us about life on other worlds.
It is our belief that the message contains instructions for building something, some kind of machine. It might be some type of advanced communication device, or it could be a teaching machine of some kind.
Could be a Trojan horse. We build it and out pours the entire Vegan army.
And that's the entire history of aliens on film. Good aliens who come to Earth bringing peace and knowledge.
We have come to visit you in peace.
Bad aliens who come to Earth for lunch. From Georges Méliès, A Trip to the Moon, 1902, filmmakers and film goers have been fascinated with life on other worlds. But big or small, cute or icky, alien life is portrayed in pop culture inevitably shares some human-like traits.
The creature here, you notice, is very unhuman-like. However, it has eyes, it has a mouth, it even has a tongue, which again is another example, I think, of our lack of creativity.
There is another reason aliens are basically humanoid. In the movies, actors had to be able to wear the costumes. In Robot Monster, the second worst movie ever made, they couldn't afford an alien costume, but the director happened to have a gorilla suit and a diving bell helmet in his garage.
You sound like a human, not a Roman.
In Plan 9 from Outer Space, the worst movie ever made, the alien beings looked suspiciously like bad actors.
Your space commander has returned from Earth.
In Queen of Outer Space, the alien looked suspiciously like a bad actress.
We're the only men on the whole planet?
Yes.
Poor Zsa Zsa looking for love in all the wrong places.
Okay, so let's see. Do we have, I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. Do we have a show of hands? Who thinks it's fair use? Either raise your hand or, okay. Okay, so most of people who raise their hand, who thinks it's not fair use?
I'm so like brainwashed to think everything's not fair use. I don't think it's fair use just because he's putting them down.
So if you're putting him down, that's actually a much stronger argument for fair use.
Okay.
Because there it's like, wait a minute, you're actually criticizing someone. So think about if a politician could censor someone who was putting them down, right? It's the same concept. Because fair use, again, is rooted in freedom of expression. Fair use is rooted in the idea that you want to stop rights holders from censoring the debate about the culture that they are participating in. And they may hold the right to that culture, but people put their identity in, Harry Potter and I just actually filed regulatory comments on behalf of the Organization for Transformative Works, which hosts 8.5 million fan fiction works on its website, right? Because people put their heart and soul into these properties that are, the IP rights to which are owned by often a large corporation. So the answer is in Wade Williams Distribution versus American Broadcasting versus ABC, it is fair use. The film in question was Robot Monster. And fun fact, my first job ever when I was 17 years old was for Wade Williams, who owned the Fine Arts Theater in Kansas City, in a suburb of Kansas City on the Kansas side. And so they owned all these old monster movies and such. And luckily they ended up making some good law long after I didn't work there anymore. Okay, next example, and this one is from around 2008. We had a film by Ben Stein called Expelled. Did anybody see this film? Well, I don't know if you're missing much. It was a film that was kind of criticizing the Academy for being too hostile to creationism. And so Ben Stein made a film, and he was essentially arguing that, it's actually really bad and really anti-academic to be so dismissive of to be so dismissive of religion. And he wanted to use the John Lennon song to make this point, Imagine, where he says, imagine there's no heaven, no religion too. The idea is like, let's live for each other. And so he created this sequence that I'm going to share now. Here we go. Can everyone see the gentleman with a beard?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. Let me try this again. How about now?
That's the spirit.
What do you see?
No.
Not yet. No, we don't see it.
Okay, sorry. Let me try it again here. All right. I don't know why it's not.
Now I have the John Lennon song stuck in my mind.
My Zoom completely crashed. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Hopefully this will work. Let's try this. Can everyone see the man?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. So we're going to watch this very short sequence.
Gives some people comfort.
Can you hear?
And
Not well.
it's like knitting. People like to knit.
Better?
We're not going to take their knitting needs away. We're not going to take away their churches. But what we have to do is get it to a place where religion is treated at the level it should be treated. That is something fun that people get together and do on the weekend, and really doesn't affect their life as much as it has been so far.
So what would the world look like if Dr. Myers got his wish?
Greater science literacy, which is going to lead to the erosion of religion. And then we'll get this nice positive feedback mechanism going, where as religion slowly fades away, we get more and more science to replace it. And that will displace more and more religion, which will allow more and more science in. And we'll eventually get that point where religion has taken that appropriate place as side dish rather than the main course.
Dr. Myers would like you to think he's being original, but he's merely lifting a page out of John Lennon's songbook.
Okay, so who thinks that was fair use to use the John Lennon song in that way?
Maybe not so much of it.
Okay. Looks like Blanche Chase is saying something, but you're muted.
I was saying that I didn't think they used too much.
Yeah. Well, Blanche has the winning argument here. Neither did the court. This is the case of Lennon versus Premise Media Corp. So Yoko Ono brought a suit and lost, and then she brought a suit for at that time there's a tiny sliver of state law that covered copyright rights. So she also sued in New York State Court and lost there as well. And here he's making a really important point. John Lennon and lots of other Westerners, people from Western Europe and the United States were anti-religion, but that's really just a short route to communism, totalitarianism, and that's just a terrible thing. And so he's making this argument. So here what happened was, the insurance company didn't want to insure it because they knew Yoko Ono would sue. So a nonprofit outfit that was based in Stanford called the Stanford Fair Use Project said, okay, well, if they get sued, we'll defend it pro bono. And the insurance company said, okay, fine. So sure enough, she sued. They got pro bono defenders, and they won. And Ben Stein, and the makers of the film won, and Yoko Ono lost in this case. And I do think it was, and one thing, the lawyers here, they said, put the lyrics on screen so everybody has a better sense of what the point is that's being made here. And that's what they did. And the court essentially said, yeah, he's trying to make a point and he's using culture to make his point, and is that really that different than if someone is saying, hey, I'm going to pull this out and criticize it? Because he's criticizing John Lennon. And he's also obviously criticizing the scientist that was immediately beforehand in the clip. All right, I have two more quick examples. All right, so I'm going to try to share my screen one more time. Let's see here. Okay, this is a very short 30-second clip, so it's not going to take too long. All right, here we go. Okay, can you see looks like a VCR screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
In the Rodney King beating trial, truck driver Reginald Denny.
This is an ad for Court TV's coverage of the trial of two men who are accused of beating Reginald Denny in the Rodney King riots in 1992.
Viciously attacked in South Central Los Angeles. They are clearly what they are. Now, two suspects, Damian Williams and Henry Watson, face life in prison. But are these the same men who appear in this videotape?
The videotape, as prepared by the prosecution, distorts the reality of the events that took place at that intersection.
California versus Williams, this week only on Court TV.
Okay, so in this case, Court TV is using footage that was taken by the LA News Service. And if anyone has seen the film Whirlybird, which I got to see at Sundance a couple of years ago, which is the fascinating story of a woman named Zoe Tour, who transitioned from Bob Tour, very famous in the 80s and 90s, because they had this helicopter that would fly around, and the whole trend of like following a car chase in slow motion on the news came from the Los Angeles News Service, who was this famous helicopter pilot and videographer, and their staff. So they actually found they are the ones who shot the Reginald Denny beating, and many news services used it, but they either paid or they got sued. And there's another case where Reuters used it and got sued, but in the case of Los Angeles News Service versus CBS, they actually used it, did not pay for it, and it was actually held to be fair use. And the reason for that is because it's transformative in the sense that they're not showing you the video so you'll see what happened. They're showing the video so that you know what you're going to be watching. You know why this trial is going to be broadcast on court TV. And so it's transformative in that sense, right? And so based on this case, we do sometimes say that making use of copyrighted material in a promo, in a trailer, it can be fair use. Now, obviously, we are much more careful with that. We are much more, we're really, really more conservative there, because, a commercial use like that, where you're using something advertising, is often less of a fair use argument than in the body of your film, but it can be fair use. All right, one more video example, and this is a much more recent case, and this is a case about the 1985 Chicago Bears. So let me just pull this.
Bears.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a case about the use of the film of the video and song Super Bowl Shuffle in a documentary about the 1985 Bears. So let me just share my screen here and you can watch it. Okay, so here they're talking about
it. Down, they got up again because the ground is no place for a champion.
Can everyone see what I'm showing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
but he wasn't going to do that. I'm not trying to be. Wait, you just on my on the big.
Okay, so it's about to start right now.
Champions, and they had that special something. Even when they were down, they got up again because the ground is no place for a champion. We are the Bears, shuffling crew, shuffling on down, doing it for you. The Super Bowl Shuffle. Well, it was pretty.
Okay, so that was just.
It's pretty great groove.
That was just a few seconds, and then if you keep watching, they talk about this song for 5 or 6 minutes, but they never play any more of it. They just show a few little shots like that repeatedly, right? Just a few shots so that you have a better sense. And they say, well, I was, number 83 was talking, and then another guy was talking, and they tell the story of how that was done. So the Super Bowl Shuffle people brought suit, and this was decided in the federal court in Chicago. And who thinks that was fair use? Tasha's yes. Who else?
It's excessive, right?
It's excessive?
Like too many times they show it. Repeated.
What do you think?
That's what I think.
Well, in this case, the court did say that it was fair use. Yeah, because, again, in the court's reasoning there was, Julie, I'm surprised that you think that wouldn't be fair use, because they only show a few seconds where the actual music, the audio is playing, and the rest of the time they just showed 1 or 2 seconds worth, and often it was specifically about, Willie Gault was a receiver, I think, on that team, and so he's being interviewed talking about his appearance and what he was thinking at the time or something like that. And, the court ultimately said not very much was being used. And so that case was okay. So I'm going to go back now to my presentation. See here. Give me a second. I'm going to go back to my presentation. Thank you for indulging me taking on that little film clip journey there.
That was fun. Thanks.
I think so as well. All right. So now I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Here we go. Yeah, and I'm not in the corner this time, but that's okay. Probably better. Anyway, all right, so I want to just go through. So this was the case, Red Label Music Publishing versus Chila Productions. And again, the court said, yeah, it's totally, it's totally fair use. And I actually think that was a slam dunk. I mean, I don't think any of these cases are particularly close, but they're all uses in documentary film. And that gives you an idea, and again, every single one, they're not trying to show you the work so you'll have fun, so you'll enjoy it. They're trying to show you the work so that you will have a greater understanding of something involved with the work. Or in the case of the film Expelled about creationism, they're making a very pointed argument about that particular work. So that was okay. So are you seeing the Bain versus Film Independent now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Another recent case, and this is not involving filmmaking per se, but what happened here is you had an artist, a filmmaker named Robin Bain, and an actress named Jessica Haid, and Jessica or Haid, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. Unfortunately, I've only seen it in the case, but she's on the left and the filmmaker's on the right. And what happened was that the filmmaker, the actress who starred in this film called Girl Lost, created a reel to show her work, which she sent to studios and agents and things like that. And Robin Bain felt that was a misappropriation of her work, and she sued and she lost. And the court said, no, that's a great example of fair use. She's not showing this so people can just, pop some popcorn and watch Girl Lost. People are using this work to evaluate whether they want to bring this person in for an audition or hire them. So just to recap, these are the rubrics we use in the clinic to decide whether something is fair use. The first one is the statement of best practices in fair use. And the second one is this 3-step test that Michael Donaldson uses. And we also use. When we do fair use, essentially it looks like this. And many of you have gone through this with other lawyers as well. We get a clip log and a link to the fair use cut of a film. And then we review the film clip by clip. And we just finished reviewing one that had almost 400 clips over a feature-length film. And the vast majority of them were fair use. Some weren't. So we met with the client over Zoom. We are actually sending our client, in this case, a spreadsheet where we have annotated every single clip and said, this is okay for fair use. This is in the public domain, or this needs to be licensed, or sometimes with little questions. Then the client will send us a final film and a document, and we then do a final review. And the last step is we write a letter, an opinion letter, and then the filmmaker takes that and gives it to his or her insurance broker, and the insurance broker uses it to get errors and omissions insurance. And the template that we have clients fill out has all this information in it. And when you get insurance, and I'll just stop sharing for just a moment, who knows, does anyone not know what E&O insurance is? Do you want me to go into it?
Yeah, explain that.
Yeah, it'd be nice for you to just explain a little
Yeah,
bit.
absolutely. So E&O is basically insurance. It's often called media liability insurance, and it can be essentially the idea is that you've had this vetted, you've gotten permission from everybody that you're working with, and so therefore you get this insurance policy. It costs anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 for a 3-year policy. Often it goes back to the inception of the project, which is really handy. And it's also worldwide, which gives you coverage even if you take the film abroad. And then if someone brings a suit for copyright infringement, brings a suit for right of likeness rights, something like that, you have insurance that will allow you to get coverage. Now the deductibles are really high; they're $10,000 to $25,000, but that's still a fraction of what a copyright infringement lawsuit costs. But it's called errors and omissions insurance, which is what a lot of businesses have, because really the idea is, like, let's say Tasha is making a film and she says, Jack, will you write a score? And I say, sure, I'll write a score. So I deliver the score, she puts it in her film, and I sign a contract, whatever. And then 2 years later, Julie comes along and says, hey, that's my score. Jack didn't write that. He stole it from me, so cease and desist, take down your film off of all these streaming sites. You call up your insurance broker and say, hey, your insurance company, and you say, hey, I need to make a claim. So that's a good example. But what happened was, remember the documentary filmmaker statement of best practices in fair use, which is from 2005. So once that was done, it was very well received by a very wide range in the copyright community. Copyright lawyers thought it was great. It was really well done, responsibly done, right? Done by people who are rights holders. So a number of lawyers for documentary filmmakers took that to the insurance companies, and they said, okay, you know what? If you get a letter from a lawyer, we will insure it as if you had gone out and gotten a license for that. Meaning, if somebody comes and wants to bring a lawsuit against you, we will pay for your costs. And if there are damages that you have to pay, we will pay for those damages, after obviously a very big deductible. But this is necessary when you get a distribution deal or a streaming deal. You got to get E&O insurance, right? And a lot of people get it while it's different from production insurance. That's like if somebody slips and falls on your set. That's different. This is for, did you dot all the T's, get all the releases, get all the clearances, get permission? You're not defaming anyone. You're not publishing their confidential information and things like that. And so it protects you. It protects you once the film goes out into the world, as opposed to during production. So anyway, so our process is, we look at the clip log and so on, and then we write an errors and omissions letter, and it looks like this. And it's very short. And so that's what we do. And a couple of other tips that I want to share. One is, be careful if you go to a studio and say, well, I just want to show this festival, can you just give me a license? And that might actually preclude your ability to make fair use later on. So be careful of the festival license. Here's another example of a festival license. The footage will be used. Oh yeah, here's it. So it says additional uses not permitted, and so on. So you're only paying $100 for that festival license, but it might actually preclude your ability to do other stuff with it. And here's another one. Then there are also, in some licenses, there are non-derogation clauses where they say, well, you will not use this in any way that's derogatory to the entertainment industry or this company or the directors or anything else. Right of publicity. So likeness rights is a whole nother conversation, and I have some slides about that I'm actually gonna, given that it's already 8:07, I think it might be time to take questions instead, and then we can get back to likeness rights if we want.
Kelly, I think Kelly has a question. Kelly, did you want to ask your question? Her question was, yeah. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, and by the way, unfortunately, when my Zoom crashed, I think I missed. Oh no, I have all the chat. Okay, So Kelly,
So I'm a fairly new producer, so I'm kind of learning all this, and I've been trying to license 2 songs that we were wanting to use in a short film. But I didn't realize you made a comment earlier that triggered that. I think, do I need to, if we had an album cover shown or a concert poster, does that have to be licensed as well?
so
Like props
this is-
that are shown?
This is pretty tough. So in documentary filmmaking, if you don't stage the environment that you're filming in, so if you don't say, like I'm not going to turn my camera on, but I've got a poster, a movie poster here, and if you film me in my office, the movie poster is going to be in the shot. That's fine. That's not problematic. But if I went ahead and said, you know what, let's use this shot for an added effect, added affect, that could be problematic. In the narrative filmmaking context, it's mixed. So there's a really bad case from almost 20 years ago from the show Rock, if any of you remember that, where they had a tapestry up on the wall, and as part of the staging, and the maker of the tapestry brought a lawsuit, and the court said it's not fair use. But then there are several other cases that involved, like one involved a mobile, and one involved some photos on the wall that you couldn't see very well. And there the court said they're not legible enough to be actionable. And then there's a few others where it's just sort of a naturally staged home, or maybe even a real home, somebody's home that's just being rented out. And those cases have said it is okay. So long story short, definitely talk to, give me a call or talk to the lawyers that you're working with, and get some guidance on that, because it is kind of tricky when you're staging a set for narrative filmmaking. There are lots of reasons why it might be fine, or might even be fair use, right? So if a character is, all about a certain show, and critique of the show and examination of the show is part of your narrative structure and part of the sort of argument of your film, then that's something we might sign off on and say, yeah, actually it would be fair use. So long story short, I hate to be that guy, but it's complicated.
It would be hard to even find who to license, because if it's like a concert poster, is that an advertisement from the band, or is it an advertisement from the location? And where do you go for those licenses then?
Well, it would be the owner of the copyright in the poster, and so yeah, sometimes it's hard to find them, but it's not impossible. And if it is impossible, that's called an orphan work. So if we've had this where people have, our clients have left no stone unturned. They looked and looked and looked and followed up with we called world expert archivists, archival producers, who all they do is find rights holders for stuff. And no, we couldn't find the rights holder. And so it got insured as an orphan work, and that can be done as well. So,
and just one more, if you license the song, would that song cover come with it, or is that separate?
Okay, so when licensing songs, and this is general, this isn't a fair use question necessarily,
right,
but that's fine. When licensing songs, you always have to think about 2 things: the recording, which is sometimes called the master use. I try not to use that, and I know a number of music lawyers are insisting that term be changed because it's got racist connotations. But you might hear about what's called the masters, or maybe we call it the source recording, or the actual recorded version. In copyright law, that has its own copyright, usually held by the producer or the label,
right,
separate from music and lyrics. So you got to pay the songwriters, you got to pay the labels, or you got to pay the publishing for the publishing companies or publishers, and then you got to pay the labels. And that's 2 separate copyrights. So Dylan Blowing in the Wind, his version, you got to pay Sony, formerly Columbia, and you got to pay Dylan or his publisher.
Yeah, and they charge most favored nation for that too. So if one says,
yeah, and there are union fees, and there are requirements about putting them in the credits, and that, like, yeah, it gets really complicated.
But the album like the song cover itself would not necessarily come with
Do you
the
mean the
master.
CD cover, or you
Like
mean
if
somebody's cover of the?
It's actually like a album. It's a 1970 album, you know.
Okay, so if it's the album, then the rights holder might be the label, but it might also be the artist.
Okay.
Yeah, you gotta figure it out. Yeah,
think our
this is one of the reasons why I'm a lawyer and not a producer, because I was invited to work on a film not too long ago, and I was like, maybe I should, and I was like, what a freaking hassle. Maybe if I didn't have a day job, but I do. All right, let's see. Carol Hall.
Yes.
If I want to adapt a novel in the public domain into a narrative film, do I have to get permission from other people who have done adaptations of the same novel? Any creative expression in the original novel is in the public domain, you're good. So screw those other people. Here's where it gets complicated. And I have a very great real world example for this. Sherlock Holmes. Okay, so right now, everything made before 1926, actually I think I always forget if it's before 1926 or 1926 or earlier. I can look it up here in a second, but everything prior to that date is in the public domain. As long as it was made available to the public, you're done. You're good to go. So that's wonderful. But let's see here. I'm going to look up to see whether it's prior to 20. I'm
not guessing again because I've been wrong every time.
I know. What is it? Like 85 years after their death?
95 years.
95 years after the author's death or something?
Well, it's the life of the author plus 70 years, or if it's made by let's see here, hold on a second. So it's anything before 1926. So 1925 or before is in the public domain. So like, for example, The Great Gatsby went into the public domain on January 1st of this year. And the silent film Ben-Hur, T.S. Eliot's poem, The Hollow Men, went into the public domain as of this year, because they're all from 1925. So some of the Sherlock Holmes books were written before 1926. So that's great, 1925 or earlier. So that they're fair use. But certain things like Elementary, My Dear Watson was added in a movie later. The weird tweed coat frock thing he wears and that floppy hat that with two brims, post 1925. So the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle estate still owns that. So you have to be very careful that every bit of creative expression that you use from that public domain novel is from the novel and not from the later filmmakers, right? And so if I decide to, like Mel Gibson did Hamlet, and he added a scene, a silent scene where Hamilton confronts his mother, but it's not, there's no dialogue. So it's true to the William Shakespeare text, but it's his own spin. And that, I promise you, that is the last time his name will come out of my mouth. I'm not a fan of the individual, but that's a good example. So if you took that expression, you might have to deal with the rights holder of that film, as opposed to obviously using the text of Hamlet is fine. Okay, let's see. Our excerpts from speeches. This is from August Varner Media. Our excerpts from speeches considered fair use. It depends on how they're being used. You can't just, there is no category of literary work or of film or something where if you take an excerpt, it's just fair use. However, almost anything a politician says is fair use. Anything that's said while in the execution of a federal official's official duties is actually in the public domain. So John F. Kennedy's inaugural speech, Joe Biden's inaugural speech, presumptively in the public domain. Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, not in the public domain. In fact, his family is notoriously litigious about the use of his film of his speeches. However, if you wanted to say, I have a dream, oh, I'm going to profile this person who was there, and that person said, oh wow, when he said I have a dream, my whole world opened up, and that meant so much to me, then fair use would probably allow you to use short excerpts of that speech. And the King estate is fairly easy to get hold of for that kind of stuff.
Jack, this is August. I'm so glad you used Dr. King as the example, because throughout the month of January, we hear excerpts or see them. And I've always wondered if performance pieces taken from his speeches are allowed.
So there was actually a case recently involving performance of a musical number from like a Broadway musical, I think it was, by a high school outfit. And the court said it was fair use. And the court said, essentially like, stop being the get off my line guy. This is get off my lawn guy. This is a high school group. They're not making any money. And I think they used it in a medley. And the court just essentially said, this isn't affecting your market. That being said, schools and other outfits do pay licensing fees for a lot of the works they might use in their forensics program or whatever. So I would be careful. At the same time, if my church group or whatever, in my case, synagogue group, we're going to be doing a speech, I probably wouldn't worry about it. Right, just as a matter of straight up risk, and a public performance versus a non-public performance, you don't need to get permission for. There's no right to restrict private performances, but of course, something over the air would be more of a performance. So does that answer your question?
It does. Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, what is next question, Ligia? Yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I missed, why did you say Obama's speech is okay to use it? You already said why, but I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. No, this is really great. And this actually gets to the next question, which is, we're going to skip Ms. Wang's question and go to the Kit Pearson question, because this goes back to what I was saying about the Obama speech. So here there's about 4 different ways things can get into the public domain. Public domain means there's no copyright. Anyone can use it for any purpose, however they want. It's owned by all of us. And that is how copyright, the only reason we have copyright, it's not because it's like, oh, we should reward people for their hard work. This is part of their personality. We should protect them. No, the only reason we allow it is to incentivize people to create works that the public can enjoy and that will belong to the public at some point. But then what happened was, a lot of people were making a lot of money on this. So they went to Congress and they got it extended from 14-year terms back in the 1789 to now life of the author plus 100, plus 70, or in the case of corporations, 95 years. So there's 4 basic categories of how things can be in the public domain. Number 1, anything created by not state government, but federal government is in the public domain, done. So army films, speeches by politicians, public domain. Second category is the term of copyright has run out. So anything pre-1926, public domain, as long as it was offered to the public or sold or rented to the public, and that's in the copyright law, that's what we call published, then it's in the public domain. Number 3, up until the 70s, and it's really complicated, and that's really terrible for the public and terrible for consumers and terrible for filmmakers. It's terrible for a lot of people, but it's really complicated. If you didn't put on your work copyright, Jack Lerner 2021, then and you released it to the public, then it went into the public domain. Why? Because a lot of people didn't care about copyright. They wanted to publish a billboard, or they wanted to publish a news article, and they didn't really care what happened with it afterwards. But that all changed in 1976 to being default copyright. So for older works, like there's a lot of movies that have entered the public domain because they accidentally got published without that copyright notice. And then related to that, even if you published it with a notice for a long time, if you didn't renew that copyright with a copyright office after 28 years, it went into the public domain. So this was great for the public, and a lot of people could make use of these materials, but a few people would end up getting having their work go into the public domain. That also, I could go on a rant about the public domain, but the final category is some people dedicate their work to the public domain. And there's a great organization called Creative Commons that has a lot of different licenses that you can attach to your work that essentially say, well, you know what? I could publish this blog post and say copyright Jack Lerner, all rights reserved. But what if I want people to be able to share it, remix it, use it, whatever? What if I want to record a bunch of drum samples and just let producers have fun with it? So I can issue it under a Creative Commons license and say some rights reserved instead of all rights reserved. And one of the licenses they have is actually not a license, it's a public domain dedication, where you simply say, I release this to the public domain. So that's what it is. It's very technical. It involves research. And just actually last night, I was like looking at old streams of like old films by auto companies for one of our clients to try to figure out, because it was marked on the web as being in the public domain. But then when I look into it, I'm like, that doesn't look like it's in the public domain. It says copyright, Chevrolet, blah, blah, blah year. So the only way that would be in the public domain is if they fail to register it up to 28 years later. And then I got to go to the Copyright Office website and troll through like all these records. It's awful. It's a big mess. So public domain is really hard, but the easy rule is US government work, fair use, or excuse me, public domain, you're done. And pre-1926 of made available to the public, you're good to go, done, don't have to think twice about it. So those are the easy cases. All right, now back up to, and now do I pronounce your name Ligia or Ligia?
Lija.
Ligia, sorry. Okay, well, I'm glad I asked. If I'm filming a live action original prequel series, fan film to an existing cartoon franchise, I'm guessing that's not fair use. If I'm not intending to generate a profit, or at least not just breaking even, could I still get sued? Okay, so this is so funny because this question is actually right out of a case that came down not too long ago. There's a couple of different cases. I actually think that fan works are really interesting and increasingly important culturally, because there are so many people that are interacting with popular culture and making that part of their identity and expressing themselves through popular culture. And yet copyright has nothing to say about it. It doesn't fit for copyright. And it ends up all being sort of underground to a degree. So to answer your question, a lot of fan fiction, I think, definitely can be fair use, right? So what if you say, I remember having a conversation, and this is going to age me, who remembers fried green tomatoes, right? So, okay, that's good, right? So fried green tomatoes, I remember having a conversation, and this is back in 1993 or whatever, and the person I was talking with said, well, of course the two women were gay, like they were going to get married. And I was like, what? Oh my God, right? So let's say we write that fan fiction, there's a good argument that might be fair use. Or take The Wind Done Gone, which is saying, well, what if we told, how about if you tell Harry Potter from Dobby's perspective, right? That might be fair use. The elf slave that they just decided to enslave. So it really depends on what you're doing. And the more that you're critiquing the original work, the stronger the fair use argument. So I think a lot of fan works can be fair use. Now, filming a live action film can be problematic. And there was recently a case not long ago where a bunch of fans got together and decided to make their own Star Trek movie. within the Star Trek canon, and I forget what the plot was, but it was, you know, deep into the weeds of Star Trek nerddom, and so I think it was Paramount, the rights holders to Star Trek said, you know what, okay, if you want to make a home movie, if you want to write fan fiction and publish it, if you maybe a fan comic, make some handmade posters and sell them at Comic-Con, at the Trek conventions, great, go for it, that's cool. But once you start making a film that you're going to release, like a whole feature length, no, we're not okay with that. So they sued, and I believe it actually either settled or gotten joined. But fair use was either not going to be a winner, or actually the court actually ruled against it. So unless the prequel is a parody or directly critical of the work, it would be problematic. Now, there are a lot of films that are feature-length films that are straight up parodies that are not permitted. And there's lots of examples where people are just using pop culture reference points that are major parts of the plot, where that could be fair use, definitely. But just a regular fan prequel that doesn't involve any of that might be a problem for fair use. That being said, you know, could one still get sued for creating an original series? Possibly, but you know, once again, there's lots of different factors to think about, and the key one there is how much you're actually targeting that original work. And the more that you're targeting that original work, as opposed to just saying like, well, what if, you know, oh, okay, let's see, someone name a popular culture franchise. Not Legia, because she's going to keep her project confidential, but just name any popular anything.
Like a football team.
Huh?
I was saying like a football team, you mean a pop culture like franchise?
Well, you know what?
Like
I just had a conversation. I just had a conversation about Succession with one of my students, and I told her what a great show it was, and like 3 months later, she's like, I just binged the whole show, like it was awesome. And it's so what if you said, all right, well, there's an attorney character named Jerry who's an attorney there and who's been around this company. So what if we made a prequel about her? That would be, you know, we'd have to see, because if it were really critiquing the way the filmmaker, all the assumptions the filmmakers made and so on, there might be an argument, but you know, we'd have to look at it really carefully and probably consult pretty heavily with the client, the filmmaker, like extensively in the writing process, the inception process, because that's going to be an uphill battle for a fan film.
So the concept of the film would matter a lot, but would the amount of profit generated, like, is there like a line that is drawn between like when it's considered a home film versus like?
Yeah. So
yeah.
In fair use, we talk about commercial use versus non-commercial use. And so I think, you know, if something was not done for money and was made available for free, that definitely will help in the fair use analysis. Courts will consider that. But you know, most fair use is a commercial use. Like pretty much all documentary and independent film is a commercial use. You're gonna sell this. You want, I don't know, Netflix to buy it for $500,000, and you know, and great, and it can still be chock full of fair use. We've signed off on lots of movies like that, and so have all the people I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. But yeah, so yeah, if you're going to be generating revenue versus a profit, then it's not as good. And the answer, of course, could I still get sued? I mean, let's face it, one doesn't have to be breaking the law to get sued, right? So you don't have to be doing anything wrong to get sued. Could you be liable is a more difficult question, but you know, that's about all I can say without having looked at the individual work and so on. Okay, what else do we seek?
We have a couple
okay.
raised hands.
Okay.
Before we answer the last question about spoofs, unless you want to answer that really quickly. We have Cynthia waiting and Giovanni waiting.
I will defer to the moderators.
Okay. So let's just take Cynthia. What you have a quick question? We're going to keep it down to 3 or 4 minutes so that we can
No, I
answer.
don't have a question. I raised my hand to one of his questions, like, yes, I agree. So, no, I don't have a question.
Oh, got it.
I lowered it.
Thank
So
you.
Cynthia Chinley, did you want to?
Yeah. So I have a writer's question. If I parody characters that are in an established book and I make them like these are real characters and I make them animals or something and I put in a different audience, like age range, is that considered fair use or is that a parody that's not considered fair use?
So in answer to Lija's question, remember I said there were 2 cases. One was about the Star Trek, and you've just identified the other case that's very similar to the scenario you mentioned. What happened here was, does anyone ever, like when maybe you had a nephew or a niece who graduated, or maybe you graduated and somebody gave you that Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, right? Everybody, it's the graduation book, yada, yada, yada. Well, Star Trek again comes in. And so some Trekkies got together and they said, we're going to make an Oh, the Places You'll Go, except Star Trek. And we're going to call it fair use. So they said, oh, the places you'll go, we're going to copy it beat for beat, except it's going to be Star Trek, everything with Captain Kirk and this and that. And they made it and they marketed it and they got sued and they lost. And this actually came down about a year ago with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which happens to be headquartered right in San Francisco. And the court basically said, where is the parody? Where is the criticism and commentary? You're basically saying, let's just take all the places you'll go and just change the, and remix it with this other thing, this other pop culture property, but it's not, where's the critique? Like, what's the new meaning or message that you're giving other than like, isn't Star Trek cool? And wouldn't it be fun to just be a Trekkie and do this, right? And there was no parody. However, there was another one, and oh God, what was it? I think it was Horton Hears a Who, but it might be wrong. But there was a you know what? I'm going to pull this up. Just give me 1 second, because this is actually really interesting. And it's worth just a quick pause. The case, see if I have it here. Yes. Okay, I'm going to share this really quickly. The case was called Lombardo versus Dr. Seuss. And so How the Grinch Stole Christmas was published by Dr. Seuss. And then there was a play in New York called Whose Holiday, which was a critique of How the Grinch Stole Christmas. It was a parody mocking the naive, happy world of the Who's, which, by the way, was part of the Supreme Court's rationale in that Two Live Crew case. They said Two Live Crew has got a lascivious, street version of Oh, Pretty Woman, and they're implicitly making fun of how wholesome Oh, Pretty Woman is and the wholesomeness of it. And by creating kind of a dirty, low-down version, and this is paraphrasing the court, and obviously that language is very weighted in the court's analysis. There's a valence there that I'm not going to get into, but the point is, the court said these rappers are actually critiquing Roy Orbison's wholesomeness and innocence, and that 30 years later, 26 years later, 25 years later, that's exactly what this court said about this play Whose Holiday, which was making fun of the naive, happy innocence of How the Grinch Stole Christmas and the characters there. So you see, when it's a parody and it's taking shots at the original work, now you're in better straits. If it's a satire, it's a little bit closer. I think almost all satires should be fair use, but courts have actually said, no, satire is not fair use, only parody. because parody makes fun of the original work. I think that's stupid, but that's what it is. And then you have, is it just a sequel or prequel, or just changing, like let's do Die Hard, only Star Trek version, like not going to work. So does that answer your question, Chantre?
Yeah, that answers my question, thanks.
Okay, great. So we have Giovanni and Tasha.
Go ahead, Giovanni.
Thank you. So this is actually perfect. That was a perfect segue to my question. So this is going to be a doozy. 3 years ago, I did a parody song to a Disney song where Ariel was an introvert. And then a YouTuber took my lyrics, I didn't know her, and it went viral on her platform. She monetized it. This was 3 years ago. My question is that 3 years now, can I do a documentary critiquing what she did and use her version of it in comparison, or is that considered fair use, or is there going to be some kind of issue there? Because it's also it's a parody of a Disney song that I put up, and then she actually took all the lyrics from and then monetized it. But if she took that thing down, but I have a copy of it, and can I 3 years later make a think piece about it?
There is a case that's directly on point. This is so fun. You're all of these. I've never actually had this before. This is I'm trying to find the name of the case. What is it? Dang case. I can't remember the actual name of the case, but there is a really great case. Like I've literally never had this happen. This is hugely fun for me, where every single question, there's like a case where they talk about the exact same thing. This is like a law professor's dream. I'm like, it's like when Harry Potter drinks the lucky potion and everything falls into place. That's like what I'm going through right now. So it's kind of fun. So there was a case where essentially you had a popular YouTube couple, and I forget their names, but maybe I'll look for it in a moment. And so this YouTube couple essentially critiqued this guy's kind of jerky, ridiculous YouTube video. So it was one very popular YouTuber going after, or a pair of YouTubers in this case, going after another really popular YouTuber. And he got mad because they made him look like a fool. And he brought a lawsuit, and my former student, Ron Barnissim, defended the YouTubers, and they won. And the idea is, they're taking shots at somebody and critiquing their work is totally fair use. And so that kind of use that you described, obviously we would want to take a look at it and actually parse every single excerpt that's taken from the other video, plus the underlying copyrighted work, the Disney work that it's based on. And we go through it, like clip by clip, excerpt by excerpt. And sometimes it gets down to frame by frame, but certainly like we'd want to go through it very rigorously and carefully. But what you're talking about is a pretty easy call. And if I can't believe I can't remember.
So even if I use a good section of her video to compare that, it's like literally it's the same, like she used my lyrics for it. Like I can use all of it, because I remember you were saying that you can only use the small section of it for it to be fair use.
So if you just show the whole video, that might be a problem. But at the same time, if let's say it's a 3-minute video and you end up making like a 9-minute, reaction video, and you're saying, and now look what she does, blah, 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 blah. And you show that, and then she does this, blah, 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 blah. It'd probably be okay. The case is, Hosseinzadeh versus Klein, and so the YouTubers Matt Hosseinzadeh sued Ethan and Gila Klein, which created the YouTube channel H3H3, and they just basically created this video that just tore apart one of his videos, and he sued and he lost. So yeah, I mean, there might be times where a huge amount can be used, but in that case, you know, the only way that would be possible would be if you use like a ton of it. If there's commentary that pertains to every part you're using, right? So maybe there's narration over it where you're saying, and then this happened and blah, 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 while it's playing. And then you say, now look what she does here, or whatever. Then it's okay. But if you're just showing more than, you know, a beat or two with just letting it play without explaining to the reader, it has to be every bit of it. Basically, you want it to be in service of a point you're making.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You are
So
welcome.
that leads into the final question,
Okay.
which is my question about the idea of, you know, you're sort of more in the green when you're doing a critique, but yet if it's satire, possibly not, but we're not sure. So what if there's a documentary created that explores the cultural relevance of a cover band that blends Bob Marley music with Led Zeppelin music with an Elvis impersonator? So you may know this band or not, but it's called Dred Zeppelin, and
I may have seen the band perform live more than once.
well, okay, so a full documentary with home movies and interviews with the band and all the music that was played. No original Led Zeppelin music, no original Bob Marley music, you know, Elvis impersonator, all in the vein of satire and entertainment. So where does that fall in the grand?
So, you know, we've dealt with, I mean, music documentaries and fair use are really tough because yes, you can make fair use and say, you know, we had one, just a beautiful little film about this very obscure old-timey ragtime piano competition in Peoria, Illinois. And you had these people that, you know, externally, like if you just look at them walking down the street, you think they're the biggest dorks in the world. But they happen to be the most joyful, virtuosic ragtime piano players you could ever imagine. And the competitions were just insane the way that they play. They were so cool. So this film was about this competition, about the individuals, just a delightful film from top to bottom, but it was incredibly difficult to make because, you know, they couldn't find the rights holders, or the rights holder, they could find the rights holders, but the rights holders would not return their calls. And there you can't rely on the orphan works thing there. It's not in the public domain. And now you either have to make fair use or not use it, right? So they're performing these works, they want to get permission. How do they do that? Or how do they make fair use of it? And the reason it was tough was not because they couldn't make fair use. They could. We made extensive fair use of these performances and saying like, and you had people describing what they were doing and you could show how virtuosic they were. But the real tension there, and this is just heartbreaking because you want to be able to like revel in the music. You want to be able to let the viewer really be transported by the music in order to really understand what's going on. And you can only go so far with fair use. You can't necessarily show the whole number, 2-3 minute number, or whatever it is, or that much of it, even though for artistic purposes, it's really important to do. So, you know, a documentary like that, whether it's of, you know, a cover band like Dred Zeppelin or some other band, you know, without getting permission from the songwriters, and you don't need permission from the record company because you're not playing the actual recordings. So without getting permission from the songwriters or the publishers, who also can grant permission, it becomes very difficult to make the film. And what's helpful there is you want to get somebody, I won't mention any names, who knows music lawyers who can get in touch with the publishers and get your phone calls returned so that you can get licenses for, not, and I don't mean you, Tasha, but just one can get licenses because, in a music documentary, it's virtually, we have lots of documentaries. We have many documentaries where just a huge amount is legitimate fair use, and then the artist did this, and this is how they did this work, and this is how they did this, and look at these people that ripped this artist off, and look at these people over here who ripped this artist off. We did this with the Kusama video. Did you see Kusama Infinity? Anyone see the Kusama film? It's so good. It's amazing. And she was very influential and very prominent within this really avant-garde pop art movement in the 60s. She had her whole life, she had pretty severe mental health issues. And I think in the early 70s, she just left New York. She's Japanese. So she was, she came in the late 50s to New York and made all this unbelievable art, and then went back to Japan in the early 70s and stayed there the rest of her life. She actually lives in a mental institution, and her studio is across the street. So she lives there and works, and she's been incredibly prolific. But my point is that we actually have lots of archival photos that we talk about and make fair use of. And we have, and there are times where we show other artists that were clearly inspired by her. And that's a really quintessential, easy fair use, come after me, come after the client because they won't, because they'll lose. Right. But the issue, say, well, she had a show. She tells the story. We show the show. We had permission for that. We tell the story of how Andy Warhol saw the show, and then like 3 months later had a show that was clearly inspired by her show, which involved putting up lots of pictures on the wall, like in an almost suffocating fashion. And he did something just like that. So that's a good example of fair use, where you can do it extensively if you're making a critique, where that might not be very doable if you are with music, when you really want to allow the viewer to soak up that music, and soaking up the music and fair use doesn't really mix very well, sadly.
So if you have the music rights, say, to all of the Dred Zeppelin music, but then is it still tied then to the original?
Well, I'm not going to speak specifically about Dred Zeppelin, but if the Dred Zeppelin versions are parodies, that's a little bit better. But that's it's a I couldn't say without looking at how they're used and so on.
Okay. Maybe there's a project for your spring course.
Possibly.
Okay, everyone. Thank you very much for all of your questions and for coming.
Did Chantray's question get answered? The one in the chat?
Let's see.
No, I'm glad you asked this question. Speaking of spoofs, was the film Spaceballs considered fair use? So Weird Al Yankovic, when I was a kid, the song Feelings, my dad used to always sing feelings or peelings, like orange peelings. And then Weird Al came out with the exact same parody later. So my dad wasn't the only person to think of it. But, Weird Al Yankovic did Eat It instead of Beat It and all this stuff. And he gets permission for everything. And why does he get permission for everything? Because those are flat out parodies. Those would be fair use, but he's always gotten permission. And one time he went to Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson was kind of like, you know what? I'm not like you're using a lot, you've done this 2 or 3 times. I'm not really comfortable with it. So Weird Al went in another direction and didn't use, I think he did it with 2 songs that were big hits, and he didn't use a 3rd song. But he probably could have. And why didn't he? The answer is, and he actually, I was just having a conversation about this with a prominent music lawyer actually on Monday. And she said, because he's like, I don't want to get sued. I don't have $100,000 to spend on whatever. Now, of course, he might be able to get it insured, but musicians don't really get insurance the way filmmakers do. It doesn't really fit. He didn't want to deal with it, and he hasn't needed to because of the prominence of that particular artist. But something like Spaceballs, first of all, Spaceballs it is clearly a parody. I would be astonished if they got permission. And I don't think they would have needed to, because it's clearly a parody, as opposed to if I made, my own sequel to Star Wars, or my own prequel. That might be more difficult, unless it was something that was pretty subversive and directly, taking aim at the Star Wars franchise, or like Dobby the Elf and Harry Potter or something, possibly. So, but yeah, I think Spaceballs was almost certainly fair use. And, back then, the fair use practices weren't as well established as they are now. So, it might have been that, and the other thing is, studios don't really sue each other for that kind of thing, because, it's like there's a word for it. It's a sort of an I scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of a thing, where, they know that they might have to make fair use of somebody else. So even though they might sue, smaller players, they don't really go after each other for fair use as much. Now they will, if it's like you did the Superman sequel and we own the rights to all the Superman stuff, but that's different. But again, studios their lawyers are educated enough now that studios are not nearly as high risk as music publishers and recording artists, performing artists, and also photographers, professional photographers, particularly contemporary ones, paparazzi. They have been suing in very large numbers, and so we are much more conservative than we were a few years ago when it comes to professional photographers. Very risky.
Well, Jack, this has been so educational and so appreciated. I cannot thank you enough personally, but I know that the group and all of our members and some of our members to be, thank you so very much. It's so important that we have our films be legal. So thanks, and happy holidays to everyone, and happy holidays to you and your family. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you. My pleasure. Julie, can you stay on for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
This was incredible. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
That was great.
Thank you.
No, not just kind of, like great, like really good. So, 2 hours, I'm like, it was so interesting.
I appreciate that. That's great. It's great to hear.
People were texting me and saying like, this is so great. I've learned so much. I'm like, we're on Zoom. Don't text me.
Do you guys have a Twitter account? You should tweet it or something.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Tasha always likes to edit everything together.
Yep.
I'm gonna stop recording now.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
So, good. Now,